Hello and welcome to Time About the Movies Flashback, and today we're flashing back to May 20th, 1988, but we're taking a look at the one big new release this weekend, and it was a doozy. It was one that George Lucas hoped was going to be his E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I mean, you got two legendary figures here, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, and Ron Howard, who had just come off of making the successful movie Cocoon, and they came together to make the film that is Willow.
You know what is real and what is not. You know what is light and what is dark. You know what is good and what is evil. Now, forget all you know. Or think you know. From the creator of Star Wars and the director of Cocoon, Willow. World premiere, May 1988.
Interesting thing about that trailer is that trailer would also be shown on TV earlier in the year, and I'm assuming it was during the Super Bowl. I think this was before having movie commercials being shown during the Super Bowl became the norm. I mean, this was before, this had to be 8 years before Independence Day, and I'm pretty sure that this was airing during the Super Bowl, because take a look at this.
Star Wars and the director of Cocoon, Willow. World premiere, May 1988.
So yeah, I think that was airing during the Super Bowl that year, and I think, like I said, it was one of those first movie promos that aired during the Super Bowl to get the buzz out there early on. I could be wrong on that, don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it was. I don't see why that trailer would be on anything else besides, unless they were going to put it on the biggest TV show of the time, which was The Cosby Show. But Willow, this was a film that Lucas actually had conceived long before Star Wars. Back in 1972, he pitched this movie, and he approached Ron Howard to direct it during when he was working on the post-production for Cocoon, and so they wrote several drafts of this. MGM came on board in 1986, and even though MGM was very hesitant to work on the film because there was the belief that the fantasy genre wasn't successful, largely because of films like Crow, Legend, Dragon Slayer, and Labyrinth not performing as well as they should have, so MGM was very hesitant to actually put this movie out there. And they were facing financial troubles back then too, so this was seen as kind of a major risk to them. But eventually, the film did eventually come out, and it was a hit. It wasn't a big hit when it came out in theaters. It was largely seen as, it was a film that wasn't considered to be a flop, but it wasn't the blockbuster that they really were hoping for. But it did eventually go on to make a profit through video sales, TV reruns, international box office returns. So it did eventually find its following over time. And eventually led to a really great Disney Plus spin-off series that came out in 2022, in 2022, that actually I do recommend checking out. But the story of this movie is that you have Warwick Davis playing the title character, an aspiring magician who teams up with a disaffected warrior played by Val Kilmer to protect a young baby princess from an evil queen played by Jean Marsh. You also have Val Kilmer's soon-to-be wife at the time, Joanna Worley, in there, as well as Billy Barty. And you could just tell when you watch this movie that it was trying so hard to be the next Star Wars for George Lucas. And that's kind of the pros and the cons of it, because visually it looks really impressive. I mean, the visual effects in this movie look pretty damn good. I think there's a lot of things about it that really make it strongly put together in terms of the visual effects. But the story, The script, I think, really is the weakest part of the movie. They didn't get a really notable guy to write this. They got a guy named Bob Dolman, who had done some stuff before, but mostly television work. Stuff like SCTV. He wrote a lot for WKRP in Cincinnati. He would later go on to write the script for Far and Away, the Tom Cruise Nicole Kidman film, The Banger Sisters, How to Eat Fried Worms. Not the best overall movies of the time of his talents, and I think the film really struggles because it's a story that's trying so hard to be the next Star Wars instead of just being its own thing, that I think it does hurt it in the long run. I think the story overall is a little bit too predictable, and it really takes its time to get going. I think that's another thing that really hurts the film in the long run, because like if you had interesting characters to work around with here and a good story, the slow pace could actually work in the film's favor, but unfortunately it didn't really do that in the long run. Not to say the characters were bad by any means. In fact, most of the characters overall were actually not that badly acted. I mean, Warwick Davis as Willow's very good. Val Kilmer has a good role in here, even though he's kind of a little bit of a Han Solo-ish type of person in this. But the pieces are definitely there for something that could actually be really, really well made. But just not the right execution in terms of the story. I think the story really is the weakest part of the whole thing, because from a visual perspective, from the action perspective, from the acting perspective, I think a lot of this does very much work, and you have a really good score by James Horner that also helps to create it, kind of give this its own little feel to it. But when it's trying to be too much like Star Wars, I think it really hurts in the long run, because there are times in here when you could tell they're trying to turn this into the next Star Wars. And I think also Ron Howard's involvement in the film kind of also might have been a little bit of a problem as well, because George Lucas and Ron Howard clearly have two very different visions I think they were trying to go with here. And this isn't the Ron Howard that we would go on to see directing Oscar-winning films like Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind. This was still a Ron Howard that was still trying to find his craft as a director after many years as an actor. You know, he had done, just before this, he did Cocoon, which was a great film, but then he did a criminally underrated Michael Keaton film, Gung Ho, and like he did Splash, he did Night Shift, and, you know, when you tackle even back then, when you tackle fantasy projects like this and you've never really done it before, you really should have some more ideas of what you want to do, of how you're able to do this first before you actually go ahead and do this. Like, it's weird. It's one of those things where it's just like, I think it was too early in his career to really try something with a bigger budget and a bigger spectacle like this. And the show after that, because he did make great movies after that. Parenthood, Backdraft, The Paper, Apollo 13. I mean, it took him almost a while to get back to something more of a big budget, but with How the Grinch Stole Christmas and then Solo: A Star Wars Story. But then again, that was around the time when he had been more adaptive to directing films, and I think it was too early in his career to really take on this project as a whole. I think they just grabbed him because he had just done Cocoon, and not everybody can do a smaller project followed by a bigger project right from the get-go, and I think Ron Howard is definitely one of those examples. But like I said, he's gone on to become a great director in his own right. But yeah, there's not really much more I could say about this as has already been said. If the story had been much more refined and been a little bit far more different than what Star Wars was, instead of trying to be just a clone of it, I really do think that this film could have been really something unique and different on its own merits. But it's still a very enjoyable film. I like the performances a lot. I think the acting overall is very good. The action overall is very good. The visuals are very well done. They still hold up after all these years. I'm glad I got to see this later on in life when I did, and I actually did find a lot of merit to it. I just wish the story had been a whole lot better. But luckily, the sequel that came out, the TV series, I think does a whole lot better job of examining what this movie really could have been. But as it is, it's a pretty good movie. I'd say definitely check it out if you want to see something that George Lucas and Ron Howard both had their hands on, even though it's not their best works together. But it works fine for what it is. But so that's my thoughts on Willow. So that's going to do it for this episode of Time About the Movie's Flashback. So next time we meet, we'll take a look at the Friday the 13th of May 1988, which coincidentally has a new Friday the 13th movie out. Friday the 13th, The New Blood. And we also have Gary Busey in Bulletproof. So we'll take a look at both of those movies on the next episode. But until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys for another episode. If you like what you saw, hit the like and subscribe button. And also don't forget to check out the previous episodes as well. So until next time, take care.